And if you look at the kind of headlines that appear in various YouTube entries from the Times of India or a few other world broadcasters, you would expect the Russians would do something really drastic. And of course, Washington must be hoping for that. This is exactly the kind of provocation that Biden and company have been trying to bring about, so that they could make it impossible for Trump to proceed with peace plans. But I don't see anything of that sort happening. The Russians' attention is elsewhere, and with good reason. It is not to carry out vengeance, although they certainly would like to, if they enjoy saying on television how exactly one Sarmat rocket could raise the entire United Kingdom to the ground. So they enjoy that among themselves. But when you look at the action side, what they're about to do, they have greater concerns. What happened to the general could happen to almost any of the leading military and industrial figures in Russia. By industrial, I mean military industrial, not private industrial. Private industrial, of course, these fellows look after themselves very nicely, thank you, for security. But the Russian generals, like the General Kirillov who was killed, they live modestly. He had no security detachment. He just had an aide who was killed with him. The apartment house, which they showed, it's a modest, ordinary, middle-class apartment house. It's not something extravagant. There's no concierge. There's no security there. And that is a situation for many of their officers which is puzzling, frankly. And I think there are a lot of people are scratching their heads now in Moscow what to do about this.
Gilbert Doctorow delves into the complexities of Russia's current stance amidst recent provocations and the assassination of prominent military leaders, painting a picture of a nation grappling with external pressures and internal vulnerabilities. He begins by addressing the narrative propagated by global media outlets, such as the Times of India and other international broadcasters, which have been speculating about potential drastic Russian retaliatory actions. Headlines suggest that Russia might respond with force or engage in escalatory measures, but Doctorow asserts that this is far from Moscow's current reality. Instead, Russia's approach has been characterized by restraint, focusing on strategic priorities rather than impulsive acts of vengeance. Doctorow notes that these provocations appear to be part of a deliberate strategy by Washington under the Biden administration to elicit an aggressive Russian response. This, he argues, is not coincidental but rather a calculated move to complicate any potential peace negotiations, particularly those that Donald Trump might propose if he returns to the presidency. The Biden administration, Doctorow suggests, seems intent on tying the conflict into an intricate knot, making it nearly impossible for a successor to unravel. By provoking Russia into overreacting, the U.S. aims to reinforce the narrative of Russia as a belligerent actor, further justifying continued Western involvement in the conflict. Despite these provocations, Russia has not taken the bait. Doctorow highlights that while Russian state television might indulge in dramatic rhetoric, such as discussing the hypothetical annihilation of the United Kingdom with a single Sarmat missile, these statements are more about domestic morale than actual policy intentions. The reality, he explains, is that Russia's leadership is focused on broader, more strategic concerns. Moscow is acutely aware of the risks of overreaction and seems intent on avoiding actions that could spiral into an uncontrollable escalation or further entrench the conflict in ways that might ultimately harm its long-term objectives. The assassination of General Kirillov becomes a focal point in Doctorow's analysis, illustrating both the vulnerabilities within Russia's leadership and the consequences of these provocations. Kirillov's assassination underscores the risks faced by Russia's military elite, who, unlike private industrial magnates, often lack adequate security. Doctorow describes the general's modest living conditions, a typical middle-class apartment with no concierge or heightened security measures, as emblematic of a broader issue within Russia's military infrastructure. This lack of protection, he argues, is both puzzling and alarming, particularly in the context of heightened tensions and targeted attacks. This vulnerability is not limited to Kirillov alone, but extends to many of Russia's top military and industrial figures. Doctorow contrasts the minimal security afforded to military leaders with the extensive protections enjoyed by private industrial elites, particularly those connected to Russia's economic sectors. These private figures often have significant resources to safeguard their interests, while key military personnel like Kirillov live without such measures, making them easy targets. This disparity raises questions about the prioritization of resources and the balance between projecting power abroad and ensuring security at home. Doctorow observes that this issue has sparked introspection within Moscow. There is now a growing recognition that the lack of security for military leaders represents a critical vulnerability, one that adversaries could exploit. The leadership in Moscow appears to be re-evaluating its approach, considering measures to better protect key figures while maintaining focus on the broader strategic objectives. However, this recalibration is not without challenges. Enhancing security for top officials requires resources and planning that could potentially divert attention from Russia's larger geopolitical goals. In the broader context, Doctorow underscores the paradox facing Russia. On one hand, it is a nation with extraordinary military capabilities, capable of projecting power on a global scale. On the other hand, it has significant internal vulnerabilities that expose its leadership to risk. The assassination of Kirillov serves as a wake-up call, highlighting the need for a more comprehensive approach to internal security. At the same time, Russia must navigate a complex international landscape, balancing the need to respond to provocations with the imperative to avoid actions that could undermine its strategic interests. Doctorow's analysis also touches on the psychological aspect of the current situation. While Russia's leadership may project confidence publicly, the recent assassination and other provocations undoubtedly create pressure and uncertainty. This tension is compounded by the perception that the West is actively seeking to exploit any sign of weakness. For Russia, maintaining a facade of control and decisiveness is as much about deterring adversaries as it is about reassuring its own population. Ultimately, Doctorow's insights reveal a nation walking a tightrope between external pressures and internal challenges. Russia's decision to exercise restraint in the face of provocations may reflect a calculated strategy to preserve its long-term goals, but it also underscores the vulnerabilities that come with such an approach. As Moscow continues to navigate this precarious situation, the question remains whether it can effectively address its internal weaknesses while maintaining focus on its broader geopolitical objectives. For now, Russia appears committed to avoiding the kind of escalation that Washington seems to be provoking, but the path forward is fraught with risks and uncertainties. According to Gilbert Doctorow, if you examine the kind of headlines appearing across platforms like YouTube, the Times of India, or other global broadcasters, you'd think Russia is about to take some drastic action in response to recent provocations. Washington, no doubt, is counting on this. It's precisely the kind of reaction Biden and his administration hope to provoke, aiming to create a scenario that complicates any efforts Trump might make toward peace. But such a response doesn't seem likely. Russia's focus lies elsewhere, and for good reason. While they might relish making remarks about how a single Sarmat missile could flatten the United Kingdom, a grim jest that plays well on Russian television, their actual priorities appear far more calculated. Revenge, though tempting, isn't driving their strategy. Instead, they're addressing larger concerns and planning their next steps carefully. What happened to the general could, unfortunately, happen to any high-ranking Russian military or industrial figure. By industrial, we're not talking about private business elites. Those individuals are well protected, with security befitting their wealth and influence. We're referring to figures tied to the military-industrial complex. Generals like the one recently killed often lead modest lives. This particular general lived in a standard middle-class apartment, lacking any extravagant security measures or even a basic concierge. He had no personal security detail, only an aide, who also perished alongside him. This stark reality is troubling many in Moscow. Questions are now swirling about how to address the vulnerability of these key figures. It's a glaring oversight, and the leadership must be grappling with how to resolve this without compromising their focus on broader strategic objectives. Thanks for watching.